The night before my son's wedding, I ironed my shirt myself. My wife, God rest her soul, she used to do that for me. 22 years of marriage, and I never once had to figure out where she kept the spray starch. I found it that night in the cabinet above the dryer, right where she'd always kept it. I stood there longer than I should have, just holding that blue can. Patricia passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. After she was gone, the house got very quiet, and my son, Brendan, became the thing I held on to. He was 29 then, newly engaged to a woman named Courtney. I told myself her sharp edges were just nerves. I told myself a lot of things. I am 67 years old. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, bridges, drainage systems, the kind of infrastructure nobody thinks about until it fails. I retired with a decent pension and a paid-off house in Carmel, Indiana, a 4-bedroom colonial that Patricia and I bought in 1998 for $187,000 and is now worth closer to $580,000. I am not a wealthy man by any standard worth bragging about, but I am not a man who needs to ask anyone for anything either. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. Brendan met Courtney at a work conference in Nashville. She worked in corporate event planning. She was pretty in that very deliberate way, the kind of pretty that takes 2 hours and knows it. The first time she came to my house for dinner, she looked at Patricia's curtains and said, "Oh, these are vintage." She meant it as an insult. I could tell by the pause before the word. But Brendan looked at her the way I used to look at his mother, so I kept my mouth shut. When they got engaged, Courtney's parents, Owen and Diane, very nice people, very concerned with appearances, took us all to dinner at a steakhouse in Carmel. It was the kind of place with no prices on the menu when you're the guest. Owen ordered a bottle of wine I know cost north of $300. I sat across from them and tried to find my son's face in the room. The wedding was set for June. Courtney wanted the venue on the north side of Indianapolis, a restored 1920s ballroom called Meridian Hall. Beautiful place, exposed brick, cathedral ceilings, the whole thing. The rental alone was $14,000 for a Saturday. Catering ran another $22,000 for 180 guests. Brendan came to me in February, sitting at my kitchen table the way he used to when he was 17 and needed to talk about something hard. "Dad," he said, "Courtney's parents are covering the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon, but the venue and catering." He stopped. "I don't want to ask." "I know that." "How much?" I said. He told me. I wrote the check for $36,000 in 2 installments. I didn't tell him it was almost all of what I had liquid outside of retirement accounts. I didn't want him to carry that. He's my son. That's what you do. I want you to hold on to that number. $36,000. The morning of the wedding was a Saturday in late June. I woke up at 6, made coffee, and sat on the back porch for a while. The garden was overgrown. Patricia's rose bushes had gotten away from me the last 2 summers. I kept meaning to deal with them. I thought about her. I thought about how much she would have loved seeing Brendan get married, how she would have cried through the whole ceremony and then laughed at herself about it. I put on the blue suit. It was the one Patricia picked out for me at Nordstrom the year before she got sick. She stood back and looked at me and said, "You look like someone who gets things done." That's the highest compliment she ever gave anyone. I've worn that suit to every event that mattered since. The ceremony was at 2. The reception followed at Meridian Hall, about 3 blocks from the church. I drove over early to help with anything that needed helping. I am not a man who stands around. Courtney's maid of honor, a woman named Sloan, met me at the ballroom entrance. She had a clipboard and a headset that made her look like she was directing air traffic. She looked at me, looked at her clipboard, and said she'd go find Courtney. I stood in the lobby for about 10 minutes. People moved around me with flowers and chair covers and things. Finally, Courtney appeared, still in her getting-ready clothes, hair half pinned up, holding a champagne flute. She smiled the way people smile when they are about to say something they've already rehearsed. "Norman," she said, "so glad you came early." Something in the phrasing caught me. "So glad you came early," as if there'd been some question about whether I would. "I thought I could help with setup," I said. "Oh, everything's handled." She glanced toward the main room. "Actually, we've had to do some reorganizing with the seating." The layout changed a little. "Okay," I said. "Where do you need me?" She smiled again. "Tighter this time." "You're at table 14, she said. "It's near the back, by the bar, actually, which is nice." I had been to the venue twice during the planning process. I knew the layout. Table 14 was not near the bar in any nice sense of the word. Table 14 was adjacent to the service corridor, the door the catering staff used to move between the kitchen and the ballroom. It was the table farthest from the dance floor, the head table, the everything. I looked at her for a moment. "Where's the family table?" I said. "Tables 1 and 2 are for immediate family. Brendan's side is table 2. She said it gently, like she was explaining something to someone who was confused. "We have some of his colleagues there, and a few of my cousins." "And his colleagues," I said. "Yes." She smiled again. "It's just how the numbers worked out. You understand." She touched my arm briefly and went back to wherever she'd come from. I stood there in that lobby in my blue suit and I did the math. My son's wedding, the wedding I had written a check for that cleaned out nearly every liquid asset I had. And I was being placed at table 14, near the service corridor, with, I would find out later, 2 of Brendan's co-workers he'd invited as a courtesy, an elderly great-uncle of Courtney's who didn't speak much English, and a couple from the neighborhood who'd been fill-ins when another RSVP fell through. I found a chair near the entrance and I sat down. I am not a man who makes scenes. I learned that from my own father. You don't hand people your humiliation to use against you later. You sit with it quietly and you decide what you're going to do. I decided. I got up, walked to my car, and I drove home. It took Brendan 40 minutes to call. I know because I was sitting in the kitchen watching the clock on the microwave, still in the blue suit, with a glass of water in front of me that I hadn't touched. "Dad," his voice was tight, "where are you? The ceremony starts in an hour." "I know when it starts," I said. "I'm at home." Silence. "Courtney said you left?" "She said you just... She's confused," she said. "I'm sure she is. Dad, what happened? What did she say to you?" I thought about that for a moment. About what it would cost to tell him the truth right now, an hour before his wedding ceremony. About his face. About Patricia's roses in the backyard. "Brendan," I said, "go get married. We'll talk later." Dad, I'm not just going to, I'm asking you to go get married, please." Another silence. Longer. "I love you, Dad," he said. "I know you do," I said. "I love you too. Go." I hung up. I changed out of the suit carefully, hung it up, and then I sat back down at the kitchen table. I pulled out a legal pad. I still use legal pads, old habit, and I started writing down a list of things I needed to do. Not out of anger. Or maybe some anger, but mostly because I had been an engineer for 31 years, and when something structural fails, you don't stand around feeling bad about it. You assess the damage. You figure out what holds and what doesn't. Then you rebuild accordingly. The first call I made was to my attorney. Stuart has handled my affairs for 12 years. Property, the trust I set up after Patricia died, all of it. I got his voicemail, left a message asking him to call me the following week. There was no emergency. I just needed to make some adjustments. The second call was to my bank. Brendan and Courtney were renting a house in Broad Ripple, a nice neighborhood on the north side of Indianapolis. The house belonged to me. I had purchased it 2 years earlier, partly as an investment and partly because Brendan needed a place and the market was right. He was paying me $1,400 a month, which was roughly half of what the market rate would have been. I told the bank I'd be calling back to discuss some changes to my property management situation. They said, of course, they'd have someone available Monday. The third call I didn't make that night, I thought about it. I set the phone down. I made a sandwich instead. Watched some baseball. The Reds were losing, which felt appropriate. On Sunday morning, I went to church. Same church I'd attended for 19 years. The same church I'd attended for 19 years. The same pew Patricia and I always sat in, fifth from the front on the left side. Pastor Ellison gave a sermon about patience that I mostly agreed with. Brendan called twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. Not because I was punishing him, because I wasn't ready. Because the thing I needed to do was not have the conversation until I knew what I was going to say, and I didn't know yet. Sunday afternoon, I drove out to a property I own in Westfield, a small rental house I bought years ago that's been consistently occupied and consistently maintained. I walked the perimeter, checked the gutters, the kind of thing I do when I need to think without thinking. By the time I got home Sunday evening, I had my list. I met Brendan for coffee Tuesday morning at a place in Broad Ripple he liked. Small shop, good espresso, exposed brick, the whole neighborhood thing. He came in looking like he hadn't slept. Courtney was not with him. I had asked that it be just us, and he'd agreed. He started to apologize before he even sat down. "Dad, I didn't know about the seating," he said. "I swear to you, Courtney handled all of it. The seating chart wasn't something I didn't know they'd put you back there. I didn't know." I held up my hand. "I believe you," I said. He stopped. "I believe you didn't know," I said. "That's actually the part I want to talk about." He sat down. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup the way he used to wrap his hands around a mug of cocoa when he was small, and something was wrong. "When you plan something together," I said, "you're both responsible for it. I understand that maybe the seating wasn't your decision, but the person who made that decision is now your wife, and you are going to spend a very long time making decisions together. I need to know that you understand what I'm telling you." "Dad, I'm not done." I wasn't harsh about it. I just kept going. "Your mother would have given that woman every grace she had. You know that. And she would have told me privately if something felt wrong, but she never would have let me be parked in the back of the room like a piece of furniture at my own son's wedding." Brendan had tears in his eyes. He didn't look away. "I know," he said. "He's what I need to happen," I said. I told him about the house, that starting August 1st, the rent on the Broad Ripple property was going to $2,200 a month, current fair market value for the area. Nothing punitive, just accurate. I told him I'd spoken with Stuart and I was restructuring the trust Patricia and I had set up, which had previously designated a significant portion of our property assets toward Brendan's future. That restructuring wasn't finalized. It was under review. I watched his face as I said it. I wasn't trying to scare him. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to hurt him. But I had learned something important in 31 years of engineering. If you ignore a structural problem because fixing it is inconvenient, eventually the whole thing comes down. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I want to be very clear about that. You are my son, and that does not change. But I spent $36,000 on a wedding where the person who managed the seating chart decided I belonged at table 14. I need your wife to understand that I am not an ATM. I am your father. And those two things come with very different relationships." Brendan was quiet for a long time. "What do you need from me?" he finally said. "I need Courtney to call me," I said. "I need Courtney to call me," I said. "Not you calling on her behalf. Her." She called Thursday afternoon. I was in the backyard when my phone rang, kneeling next to Patricia's rose bushes, which I had finally decided to deal with. I had on my old work gloves and there was dirt on my knees. I looked at the screen, saw it was Courtney, and I answered. "Norman," she said. "Hi." Her voice was different, Not the polished event planner voice, something underneath it that was younger and less certain. "Hi, Courtney. Brendan said you wanted me to call." A pause. "I've been thinking about Saturday." "I've been thinking about it a lot, actually." "I appreciate that," I said. I want to say that I didn't fully think through what it would feel like. To you. I was managing so many logistics and I made a decision and I didn't ask Brendan and I didn't think about. She stopped. "I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry." I believed her. Not entirely. I'm 67 years old and I've been in enough rooms with enough people to know when an apology is mostly about consequences. But there was something real in there too. Something uncomfortable and human. "Courtney," I said, "you're going to be part of this family for a long time, I hope. And there are things I want you to know about how I'm built." "Okay," she said quietly. "I worked and saved for 30 years to be able to help my son. That is not nothing. That is not a resource. That is love expressed in the only way I had available in those particular moments. When you put me at table 14, you weren't just rearranging chairs. You were telling me what you think I am. And I need you to know that who I am and what I've done for this family are not separate things." Silence on the line. "I understand," she said. "I hope so," I said. Then I told her I'd like us all to have dinner together when they were back from the honeymoon. Nothing formal. Just dinner at my house. I'd make the pot roast Patricia always made, the recipe I'd finally figured out after about 9 failed attempts. She said yes. Her voice was a little thick. "I'll try to be better," she said. "I mean that." "I know," I said. "That's all any of us can do." After I hung up, I went back to the roses, pruned them back harder than I had in years, got them down to the strong cane, cut away all the dead growth. By the time the lights started going, I had 3 garbage bags full of trimmings, and the bushes looked like they might actually recover. Patricia would have appreciated that. She hated giving up on something that still had life left in it. They came to dinner 3 weeks later. Brendan brought wine. A bottle he'd picked carefully, I could tell. Courtney brought flowers, not roses, dahlias, orange and yellow, which she arranged in the blue vase on the dining room table without being asked. I noticed that. The noticing things, the trying. We ate, we talked. It wasn't perfect. Some silences lasted longer than they needed to. But Brendan laughed at something I said about the Reds, and it was his real laugh, the one that's been the same since he was 8 years old. And I thought, okay, we're still here. After dinner, while Brendan was in the other room, Courtney helped me clear the table. She picked up Patricia's good china carefully, the set we only brought out for things that mattered. "These are beautiful," she said. It wasn't the way she'd talked about the curtains. "My wife picked them out," I said. 30 years ago, she had good taste." Courtney looked at the plate in her hands for a moment. "I wish I'd gotten to know her," she said. That hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. "She would have figured you out pretty fast," I said. "That's not an insult. She was just like that." Courtney smiled, something a little crooked in it, a little real. "I believe it," she said. I adjusted the trust the following month. Stuart called it a minor revision. Brendan's future share stayed intact. Some things you don't take back, you just hold differently. Like an old suit you haven't finished wearing. I still take it out sometimes. Still fits. Still looks like someone who gets things done. I've been thinking about roses lately. Specifically Patricia's roses. The ones I finally pruned back hard after all those years of letting them go. I thought I was being kind, leaving them alone. Turns out I was just avoiding the work. And the whole time they were getting weaker, not stronger. People aren't so different. When I wrote that first check for Brendan and then the second one, I wasn't doing it to be thanked. I want to be clear about that. I did it because he's my son, and that's what you do when you love someone and you have the means. But somewhere in all that giving, I stopped asking a harder question. What was I teaching him? What was I teaching her? That support arrives without conditions. That generosity has no memory. That a man can fund someone's entire life and still get placed at table 14 without it meaning anything. That's not love. That's enabling. And enabling isn't kind. It just feels kind while it's happening. The moment I walked out of that ballroom, I wasn't angry. Or I was, but the anger wasn't the point. The point was something I hadn't let myself think clearly in a long time, that I had made it very easy for people to take me for granted. Not because they were bad people, because I had never once shown them what happened when they did. That's on me. That's the part I had to sit with. Brendan is a good man. I know this. The way I know my own hands, completely, without having to think about it. What happened at that wedding wasn't a revelation about his character. It was a warning about a pattern. And patterns, if you don't interrupt them early, become the structure everything else is built on. I know that from 31 years of engineering. A small misalignment at the foundation doesn't stay small. So I didn't blow anything up. I didn't cut anyone off. I made some adjustments. I let the consequences be real instead of theoretical. And I had an honest conversation at a coffee shop in Broad Ripple that was harder than anything I'd said out loud since Patricia's funeral. That's what intelligence actually looks like, I think. Not being the smartest person in the room, not having the most cutting response. It's knowing the difference between a reaction and a decision. It's waiting until Tuesday to say what you could have screamed on Saturday. It's understanding that the goal was never to win. The goal was to still be at the table a year from now, in a way that meant something. Courtney called me. She didn't have to. She could have let Brendan handle it, let the whole thing get smoothed over with time and distance. Instead, she picked up the phone and said she was sorry and meant at least part of it. That took something. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I adjusted the trust. Brendan keeps his future. Some things you don't take back. You just hold differently. The roses came back this summer. Not perfect, but alive, which is enough.